At the far western edge of the world, where the sun goes down into a dark and endless sea, a giant stands alone beneath the sky. Upon his bent shoulders and upraised arms rests the whole enormous weight of the heavens, every cloud, every star, the turning dome of the sky itself, and he can never put it down, not for a night, not for a single moment. Since before the first cities were built, he has stood this way, and according to the old stories, he is standing there still. His name is Atlas, and he was once among the strongest and proudest of the Titans, the elder gods who ruled the universe before Zeus. What could anyone possibly do to deserve a punishment like this? Not death, not prison, but an eternity of holding up the sky. That is the story tonight. The great war Atlas fought and lost, the terrible sentence Zeus laid upon his shoulders, the famous hero who tricked him out of his one chance at freedom, and the strange, quiet mercy that finally came for him in the end, a mercy that turned him into a mountain range which still carries his name today. If you enjoy these stories, take a moment to subscribe. It truly helps this channel, and tell me in the comments which myth you'd like next. Now settle in and travel back to the beginning, to the days before Zeus ruled the heavens, when the Titans still sat upon their thrones. Long before Zeus ruled from Olympus, the world belonged to an older family of gods called the Titans. Chief among them was Cronus, who had taken the throne of heaven from his own father, and around him gathered his mighty brothers and sisters and their children. One of those children was Atlas. His father was the Titan Iapetus, and his brothers were famous names in their own right: clever Prometheus, who could see what was coming; scatterbrained Epimetheus, who only understood things after they had happened; and proud, hot-tempered Menoetheus. But Atlas surpassed them all in one respect: sheer, staggering strength. The old poets say there was no one in that first age of the world, god or titan, who could match the power in his shoulders and his back. Even his name carried the idea. In the old tongue, it meant something like the one who endures, the bearer, the one who carries. It was a name that would come to fit him in a way no one could have imagined. In those days, though, his strength was simply his glory. Atlas stood tall in the courts of the Titans, honored and secure, and in time he fathered daughters of his own, among them the Hesperides, the gentle nymphs of the evening, who would one day tend a garden at the very edge of the world. Atlas had power, family, and standing among the rulers of the universe. Then, Zeus rose up against Cronus, and everything the Titans had built began to crack. The war between the Titans and the young gods is called the Titanomachy, and the Greeks remembered it as the most terrible war ever fought. For 10 full years, the two families of gods hurled everything they had at one another. Zeus and his brothers and sisters held Mount Olympus, Cronus and the Titans held Mount Othrys across the plain, and between them the world itself was torn apart. Whole mountains were ripped up and thrown like stones. The sea boiled, forests burst into flame, and the earth shook so violently that even in the deepest pit of the underworld, the dead heard the thunder of it rolling overhead. In that war, Atlas was the champion of the Titans. Some of the old writers say he led their armies in battle, that he was not only the strongest of them, but their general, the one who marshaled the elder gods and drove them forward against Olympus. His brother Prometheus, who could see how the war would end, quietly went over to the side of Zeus. Atlas did not. He stood by Cronus and the old order, and he fought with everything his tremendous strength could give. But strength alone was not enough. Zeus freed the Cyclopes from their prison, and they forged him the thunderbolt. The 100-handed giants joined him, hurling 300 boulders with every volley, and at last the stronghold of the Titans was broken, and the old gods were beaten to their knees. Then came the judgment, and the victors were not gentle. Zeus dealt with most of the defeated Titans in one sweeping stroke. They were bound in chains and cast down into Tartarus, the black pit beneath the world, as far below the earth as the earth is below the sky, behind bronze gates that would never open. It was a terrible fate, but at least, down in the dark, the Titans had one another. For Atlas, Zeus designed something different. Perhaps it was because Atlas had led the Titan armies. Perhaps Zeus simply understood that the deepest punishment for the strongest of all beings was not prison, but burden. Whatever the reason, Atlas was not thrown into the pit. Instead, he was marched, under guard, across the whole width of the world, past every land the Greeks knew and beyond, to the far western edge of everything, where the sun sinks into the outer sea and the sky bends down to meet the earth. There he was given his sentence. The heavens, the whole vast turning dome of them, must be held apart from the earth forever, and Atlas would be the one to hold them. The sky was lowered onto his shoulders. The old poets pause over that moment, the knees bracing, the back bending, the arms rising to take a weight that no other being in creation could have carried for a single heartbeat. Atlas took it because he had no choice, and he did not fall. And when the gods turned and left him there, the silence that followed was the beginning of eternity. How does anyone endure a punishment that has no end? The old stories linger on the strange, lonely world that grew up around him. At the western rim of the earth, there were no cities, no travelers, no voices, only the gray outer sea rolling against the cliffs, the wind coming off the water, and the slow wheel of the stars turning above his bent shoulders. Atlas learned the sky, the way a prisoner learns the walls of his cell, the constellations rising and setting in their long procession, the heavens growing heavy with winter storms and then lighter again in the clear nights of summer. Season after season, century after century, the weight never left him, and no one came. Yet the place was not entirely empty. Nearby, in that same far western land, lay a garden, a walled orchard of soft evening light where a single wondrous tree grew, heavy with apples of pure gold. The tree had been a wedding gift to the goddess Hera, and it was tended by the Hesperides, the nymphs of the sunset, Atlas's own daughters. A great serpent named Ladon lay coiled around the trunk, sleepless, guarding the golden fruit. On quiet evenings, the poets say, the daughters of Atlas sang among the trees, and their singing drifted out to the place where their father stood beneath the sky. It was the only comfort he had. One other thing kept him company, an old prophecy that a son of Zeus would come one day to steal the golden apples. When that stranger finally arrived, would he bring ruin or release? After ages beyond counting, someone finally came, and he was indeed a son of Zeus. His name was Heracles, the greatest hero the Greek world ever produced, and his 12 impossible labors have their own story on this channel. The 11th of those labors had brought him here. He had been commanded to fetch the golden apples of the Hesperides, and he had crossed deserts and seas and fought his way past monsters to reach the western edge of the world. But Heracles had been warned, some say by wise Prometheus himself, whom the hero had lately freed from his own long torment, that no mortal could take the apples with his own hands. Only Atlas could pluck them. And so, standing before the bowed giant who held up the sky, Heracles proposed an exchange that no one had ever dared to imagine. The hero offered to take the heavens onto his own shoulders, just for a little while, if Atlas would go and fetch the apples for him. Atlas could hardly believe what he was hearing. Heracles set his feet, braced his back, and took the way to the sky, and for the first time since the fall of the Titans, Atlas stood up straight. The stories give that moment room to breathe. The giant rolled his aching shoulders, lifted his head, and walked, simply walked, feeling the ground pass beneath his feet, across the western land to the garden of his daughters, where he took 3 golden apples from beneath the sleepless serpent's gaze. When Atlas came striding back with the golden apples in his hand, he had made a decision, and after all those ages, who could blame him? Freedom was far too sweet to give up. As casually as he could manage, the giant told Heracles that there was no need to trade places again. Atlas himself would carry the apples to the king who wanted them, and Heracles could simply stay where he was, holding the sky. A few months beneath the heavens, what was that to a hero? Heracles saw at once what was happening, and he knew he could never overpower a Titan while the whole weight of the sky was crushing down on his own shoulders. So he thought quickly, and he answered like a man agreeing. A fair arrangement, he said, only would Atlas take the weight back for just a moment, so that Heracles could fold his lion-skin cloak into a cushion for his shoulders. Such a small, reasonable favor. Atlas set the golden apples down in the grass, stepped over, and took back the burden of the heavens. And Heracles picked up the apples, thanked him politely, and walked away toward the east and home. The old storytellers do not mock Atlas for falling for the trick. No gloating fills the scene, only a giant standing at the edge of the world, bent once more beneath the turning stars, watching his one chance in an eternity disappear down the long road. The poets told one more story about Atlas, and it is the strangest and, in its own way, the kindest. It does not quite fit the same timeline as the tale of Heracles, but the old myths were never built to fit timelines, and the Greeks told it anyway. In this story, a different son of Zeus came flying out of the eastern sky on winged sandals. His name was Perseus, and he was returning from the deadliest errand ever given to a young man. In his satchel, he carried the severed head of Medusa, the gorgon whose gaze turned every living thing to stone, and whose own sad story has already been told on this channel. Perseus was exhausted, and as evening fell, he came down at the edge of the world and asked the giant for shelter for the night. But Atlas remembered the old prophecy that a son of Zeus would one day come to rob the golden tree, and his heart hardened, and he turned the traveler away with threats. Perseus knew he could never match the strength of a titan. So he turned his own face aside, reached into the satchel, and lifted out the head of Medusa. And Atlas, weary, ancient, unimaginably tired, looked. The change came over him like winter coming over a landscape, his beard and hair becoming forests, his shoulders becoming ridges of rock, his bones turning to stone as he grew, vaster and vaster, until the giant was gone and a long mountain range stood at the edge of the world. And upon its highest peaks, the sky came gently down to rest. They stand there still. In the far northwest of Africa, where the ancient world believed the earth came to its end, a long wall of mountains rises between the desert and the sea, and the people of the old world looked up at those peaks and said, "That is him." Those are the Atlas Mountains, and on their highest summits, the sky itself seems to rest. His name never left the world after that. The great ocean beyond him became the Atlantic, the Sea of Atlas. And centuries later, when mapmakers first bound the whole world into a single book of maps, they put the burdened giant on its cover and called the book an atlas, a name still used for such books today. Yet the ending of his story deserves a moment more. Nearly every other figure the gods punished, chained to a rock, or rolling a boulder uphill, or reaching forever for fruit just out of grasp, remained trapped and suffering, awake inside the sentence. Atlas alone was released, and not by rescue, and not by forgiveness, but by becoming something that no longer feels the weight, patient stone, holding up the heavens without pain, wrapped in forests and snow, with his daughter's garden somewhere in the evening light below. The Greeks never quite said it aloud, but the shape of the story says it for them, that for the weariest of all beings, turning to stone was not a defeat. It was rest. If this is the kind of story you want more of, take a moment to subscribe and tell me in the comments which myth I should tell next. Sleep well.